Welcome back, everybody, to the Always Bayern Chelsea show. Today is September 4th. We're talking transfers, the craziness, the madness of the transfer window. It's all over and done with now, hopefully. Hopefully, there's nothing crazy that happens between now and when we publish this video, but wouldn't put it past the craziness of this transfer window. So, we had our first Always Bayern Chelsea transfer. Nico Jackson on loan to Bayern Munich from Chelsea Football Club. Please subscribe to our YouTube here, Always Bayern Chelsea. Leave a like, leave a comment. We're building a community, and we're going to give you a nice overview of the transfer window for both Bayern and Chelsea, ratings, all that stuff. So please stick around. Thanks for tuning in.
Yes, thank you so much for tuning in. It has been quite the couple weeks here. We've talked a lot about the UCL matchup between Bayern and Chelsea. We've talked about Nico Jackson 1,000 different ways, videos, shorts, tweets. He's there, he's not, he's over here. Oh, he's
He's
actually
back
behind
there.
me.
Oh,
And of course, I make a sudden movement and the camera hates me. We'll start with Chelsea because it's ABC. You always start at the bottom, and I have Chelsea first in my notes, so it makes sense to start with Chelsea.
yeah, well, I'll let you take the reins. I didn't really take notes about Chelsea, but tell us who came in, who went out, and maybe an overall grade. Maybe we'll save that to the end to keep people waiting in suspense. I don't know. You can take the reins. I'll follow your lead. But yeah, as always, the transfer window would be nothing without Chelsea because they have millions and millions of transactions every window.
Yeah, it was an insane window. This window technically started kind of 2 years ago because you end up bringing in some players, Estevao. Santos comes in after we had signed him a while back, loaned him out. So a lot of things for Chelsea with the way they buy young talent, develop them, get them in the future. We got guys coming in a couple of years from now. So because of that, it almost makes the window feel less and it ends up being more. You don't think right away of, oh, Estevao was purchased in this window, but he was, and he's a huge name. So I just want to note that because I think a lot of people don't consider that when they're thinking about the entire window, and it is important to consider that. But overall, it was an effective window in some ways for Chelsea. In other ways, maybe not as fulfilling for some of what the people wanted. I will quickly just run through, starting with incomings. We'll dive into a couple of these players, but there's just so many. So we got Gittens, Garnacho on the left wing, Delap, Pedro up top, Estevao, Facundo, Buonanotte on loan from Brighton, Dario Essugo, Santos in the midfield, Jorrel Hato, left-sided center back, left back, and then you got technically coming in as well, Paez, Penders, and Mamadou Sarr. Those three all then loaned out back to Strasbourg. So we'll start there. We'll just quickly kind of talk about a few of them. Any of those that jump out to you that you want to start with?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I don't think all Chelsea fans see it this way, but I do think it was overall a net positive window for Chelsea. I think that the team is better now than they were before the window. That's kind of the main thing that I look at. I mean, Joao Pedro has been a star. Estevao has the flashes of becoming a star, scoring a goal for Brazil moments ago as we record this. So, you bring in guys like that, you bring in a guy like Delap, and obviously all the youngsters, and it's like I see Chelsea's vision. I'm not saying you have to agree or disagree with anything or everything about their vision, but they have a vision, and that's the problem that I think Bayern lacks a lot of the times with their transfers. So I think overall Chelsea has a vision. They're following through on this vision, and I think the team's in a better place now than they were before the window, and that's a great place to be. It might not be perfect, but it's very hard to have a perfect window. So I would say Pedro and Estevao probably the two with the most star potential right now.
I agree. I have the incomings rated as a 7, could arguably be a 10. And part of that downgrade is really, Nico. leaving, which doesn't affect your incomings, but kind of does because you didn't end up getting anybody else after the Delap injury, which is tough to consider. If you don't consider injuries at all, you could argue the window ends up being better. Love the potential of some of these guys, Gittens, Garnacho, Estevao, clearly, Santos, what he's going to provide in the midfield, as well as Hato. Pedro is a star already, which I love. Delap, I think, has made an instant impact. And even Santos, who I did mention has potential, also making an instant impact coming off the bench. So you kind of mix potential with what you have right now, and I think that makes it very solid. Now, if we go to the other part, which I think is equally as important, you got your outgoings. And you could argue that this was going to be the tougher part for Chelsea in this window. I mean, if you recall, the last few years, all the talk has been, man, Chelsea have a bomb squad. How are they going to fit guys on a plane? That's all we heard the last couple of years.
Yeah, and it's always going to be the harder part for Chelsea's model, Chelsea's program. Buy a lot of youngsters, try to develop them. Sometimes they turn out to be star boys. Sometimes you got to sell them. And again, like I'm not commenting one way or the other on the model right now. I'm just saying that is what it is, and it's always going to be harder to get rid of guys. Now, when you have Strasbourg that you can just dump the Chilwells of the world off to, that might help a little bit. But no, seriously, like it's going to be harder. And Chelsea, I think it wasn't perfect, but I think you look at like how much they got for guys like Noni, you can't be mad at that.
I agree. And it was always going to be a very tough undertaking for Chelsea, the sporting directors, owners, to offload some of these guys. The list I'm about to read does not include a lot of academy guys and younger guys that were loaned out or sold. This is pretty much just the first team. So we got in the attack, Jackson goes out on loan. Broja sold. Felix sold. Noni, Christo sold. In the midfield, Ugochukwu, Amougou, Carney Chukwuemeka, Dewsbury Hall, Matos all sold. Then you got in the defense, Chilwell, Gilchrist, Humphreys, and Veiga all sold. Finally, 5 keepers sold. Actually, even more when you count more young guys. You had Eddie Beach, Lucas Bergstrom, Marcus Bettinelli, Kepa, and Georgi Petrovic all go out in this window permanently. How many names is that? I mean, that's what, over 20 plus a ton more?
Yeah, that's insane. Do you know, was Chelsea positive or negative, or like what was their overall net in terms of money coming in versus money going out?
It was 17 million, and I believe that was money they made, if I'm not mistaken. Either way,
Yeah.
it's so insane. But they set a record for most amount sold. I know that's a fact. And then they still obviously spent a lot as well. So you could argue Chelsea is the number one selling club in the entire world of football. They have the record. They have the number 2 spot as well. And I think the 4th and 5th or something, all in the last 5 or 6 years.
Yeah, I mean that is crazy. And like I said, I already mentioned Noni, but like you got Felix in there, you got Christo, you got some of these guys who I think went for a pretty favorable price for Chelsea.
And people don't like talking about this side of the business and the model for Chelsea, but part of their model is buying guys and flipping them. Not every guy you buy will be a part of your team going forward when you're Chelsea with this model. I think Bayern's model that they've done forever, they're not going to do that, and a lot of teams don't. Most teams don't. Chelsea, ever since they've been in this new ownership, they really have just decided, since we're buying so many young guys, we'll end up selling them. You sell Veiga for almost 30 million. You bought him for, maybe 10, 12 million. Felix, you somehow get money back on. Christo, basically money back on once you consider he was here for a couple of years. So it's kind of insane how this ends up working. The only downside, which you and I have talked about extensively, you're not going to be able to offload all your players. And to be fair, Chilwell and Sterling were kind of guys that Chilwell under the old ownership, high wages, Sterling technically under Blue Co, but one of the earliest guys when they didn't realize high wages was a bad move. So Chilwell, they dump. I'm guessing that's just still a wash because you own Strasbourg. So whoever's paying the wages, you're not like making anything off of that.
Well, the
Um,
the negotiations for that one were really tough. Todd Bowley and Todd Bowley staring in the mirror. I mean, that was a crazy, crazy heated argument, I'm sure.
yeah, no, I bet it was. I mean, you never know with some of those mirrors on the wall, they can talk right back to you. So, but your Sterlings, your Disassis that didn't go, it's an L. You take the L on that. Sterling's getting paid 300K tops at Chelsea, and he doesn't want to go anywhere. He wants to stay in London. He's played so much football at this point. He's been playing first team football since he was like 16. So I don't know. I don't necessarily blame the guy, but you want to just sit and do nothing?
Yeah, that's crazy. That one's gonna hurt, but I mean, there really is not much you can do. I don't know who would buy him for a fraction of what he's getting paid, and it sounds like he wouldn't even want to go anywhere else anyways. So you kind of just have to eat that one.
It's definitely crazy. Moving on quick here to some loans. Again, as I said, a lot of guys get loaned that I won't mention, but the important ones are the three at Strasbourg developing there under Liam Rossinier, Kendry Paez, Mike Penders, Mamadou Sarr. Then you got Ansel Mino to Dortmund, already looks incredible. Castledine, I think somewhere in the championship. Omari Kellyman, League One. Ishe Samuel Smith going to Swansea in the championship. And then Caleb Wiley, left back, going back to Watford. Finishing it off with Nico Jackson, technically is loaned out to Bayern. And we'll quickly talk there because at this point, what we know is that it's a loan with an obligation to buy if he meets a certain standard. And that standard is apparently play X amount of games. Now, we don't know specifics. Some have said it's going to be so easy to get to. Some have said it's going to be impossible to get to. Are these clubs briefing? Probably. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's so hard for me to actually like accurately comment on this loan in terms of the terms of the loan, who it's good for, who it's bad for, because we don't know that number. And it's like also if we get to a point, is Bayern gonna shut him down? I just don't know. I mean, it's so tough with a guy like Jackson, with a squad like Bayern, who is hardly ever healthy. It's tough to see that he wouldn't make a certain number of games, but also I've also read the reports that you've mentioned where it's like it's such a high number, it's going to be really hard. I don't know. I think straight loan, I know it's a high fee. I think it's good for Bayern just because they have such a thin squad, and it's like they desperately, desperately needed somebody to come in for rotation, for playing while Musiala's out, for all this stuff. Bayern has some weeks here where they're going to be playing 3 matches in a week, and it's just not sustainable to play the same 11 guys 90 minutes plus 3 times in a week. And Jackson could end up being a super important guy for Bayern. So I'm gonna just look at it from that standpoint, from what kind of player is he, what can he add to the squad, and if it gets to the point where he's going to meet that threshold of matches, I'll think about it and comment on it then because the price for Bayern is arguably not great. I know that the striker market is insane and you could argue his value, but if Bayern doesn't see him as the successor to Harry Kane and they're going to go out next summer and spend 100+ million euros on somebody to play striker anyways, and you have to pay Jackson whatever the total ends up being, 80 some mil euros, then it's not a good move in my mind. But again, like I can't comment on that right now. Right now, I'm just going to think about what kind of player can he be for Bayern Munich on loan this year.
Nico is to kind of round all this off for Chelsea. Nico's the only player that I'm going to miss that went out, I think, especially after the Delap injury. It's kind of a hole at Chelsea right now, depending on how long he is out. Nico could have done great things with this Chelsea side. Um, Really, the only downside of Chelsea's window is could you have brought in a center back to replace Colwell? Maybe. Could you have brought in a different keeper? Maybe. Those are maybes. Those aren't like, yeah, you really had to do this or you're going to be screwed. So that's kind of why overall it's probably a 7 out of 10 window for me, with only Nico the one where I end up with tears.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna go 8 for Chelsea. I'm feeling pretty good about Chelsea's window, all things considered. For me to bump it up to a 10, I think it would be that keeper position. If you would have got like a lockdown guy who you know is gonna be your keeper of the future, who you know is gonna propel you to the highest of highs this year, that's a 10 for me. So I'll give him an 8 because mentioned it already. I do think the squad is a lot better after this window than they were prior. I think they have a vision. I think they're set up well for the future. So overall good, very good, you could say. Window for Chelsea, in my opinion. But, this is something I'll talk about with Bayern too. Overall, I don't think it's great to go and like panic buy a guy to fill a spot for someone who's going to be injured for a relatively short amount of time. Now, does that mean you have a thin squad at that position? If all it takes is an injury or two to put you in a dire position, maybe. But I just think it's tough, like with this market right now, to go out and spend 80 mil on a striker who's maybe not going to be your starting striker when everybody's healthy.
Very tough to always have the right amount of depth and talent. And I think teams are battling, struggling to find that at all times. And not to mention, Chelsea are also trying to build for the future and the present. This is an impossible task, and they're attempting to do it. So good luck to them in that endeavor.
Yeah, and now moving on to Bayern Munich. I'm not as happy with Bayern Munich's transfer window as I was with Chelsea's for a lot of reasons. I'm maybe not as pessimistic as a lot of fans with this window for Bayern, but I don't think it was great. I think they spent too much time on some guys they were never going to get. I think they struck out massively on some guys who they kind of needed to get. And I think they didn't really have a backup plan I mean, let's just say it right away. Bayern thought they were going to get Florian Wirtz. And when that didn't happen, it was like this panic situation. Nobody was aligned. There was no vision. And some transfers were made that I think are good. A lot of guys left. And then the directive was given from the top, hey, you can only get a guy on loan, because of maybe what I just said. You don't want to spend a ton of money on a guy permanently who won't be a starter when everybody's healthy. I get it. The Bundesliga with the 50+1 rule with how TV rights are, you're not going to be able to go out and spend 90 million on a Voldemata like Newcastle could. So there's some like overarching blockers that Bayern had. But that being said, Bayern is still a wealthy enough club.
Sticking on the Verts topic real fast, and I'd never thought about it this way until now, but you throw all the eggs into one basket with Verts, you strike out, you don't necessarily have a ton of options after that. Compare that to Chelsea, who seemingly reach agreement with about 10 guys personal level, and then from there they meet with the clubs and decide who they want. It almost seems like complete opposite type of strategy negotiation. And I think there's a pros and cons to each for sure. I kind of respect Bayern's way a little more because it seems like you're kind of more genuine when you're doing that. But clearly for them, that didn't work when they didn't get Birds. And because of that, they kind of struggled the rest of the way. Did they maybe panic buy with a Diaz, with this Jackson deal? We'll see. We'll see how things do pan out. But I kind of just never thought about it that way. And it is kind of interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost the opposite of how Chelsea does things. Like Bayern had all these guys go out this window and like didn't fill all of them, didn't fill a lot of them. So it's interesting. That being said, I think, I've maintained this all season. When the starting 11 is healthy, Bayern has one of the best teams in the world. I think they can beat anybody when their starting 11 is healthy. The problem is, how do you keep them healthy? You have some depth, you have some ability to rotate, and Bayern just doesn't have that. And they're never, ever healthy when it matters. And again, like the squad they have in my mind is good. It's good enough to win the Bundesliga, especially because in my mind it's a down year in the Bundesliga in terms of overall quality. I mean, there was just a raid in the Bundesliga. So many top talents leaving for the Premier League and other leagues. So Bayern should still be good enough to win the league. They won the Super Cup, obviously, here. They should still be good enough to win the Pokal. Anything can happen in the Pokal, but can you make a deep Champions League run when you have as thin of a squad as they have? It's going to be tough. And I still have a lot of questions about that back line. There's, we got Jonathan Tah. That was one of the incomings. We'll talk about all the incomings, but the back line remains a major question to me. They're so unorganized right now, and it's like lapses in play that just lead teams to come back so far. So it's a little bit um, it's a little bit concerning, and just the lack of the overall vision with Bayern. Those are kind of like my main key takeaways from this window, and then I'll go through who came in, who went out, and talk about some guys individually.
Yeah, the vision thing I definitely agree with. You know, it's tough to say what their vision is, if it's companies, if it's the board's vision. It's really murky at times to tell. When you let a guy like Sane go, then you bring in a Diaz. Some would say it's a similar player. Muller obviously leaves. That's a whole personality wise and player wise. Coman heads out the door. So it's like, then do you decide to go in a different direction with the type of guys you bring in? I don't know. Are you trying to go young with some guys because you're letting Muller go? So I think Bayern just don't really know where they are heading. I agree.
The vision thing for me is like there's a lack of vision because there's a lack of alignment. And we've seen it so many times this transfer window. Ibro wants somebody, Freund wants somebody, Company wants somebody. Uli blocks it. KHR blocks it. And it's like there's all these different pieces, and it's why no deal for Bayern happened fast. It's why they spent a lot of time chasing ghosts, in my opinion. And let me just hit on those guys first because I am going to include this into the overall grade of Bayern's transfer window. Florian Wirtz, the Golden Goose, whiffed. Courted him for years and years and years since he was like 16 years old. Was sure they were going to get him. Whiffed, whiffed, whiffed. That's on Uli, in my opinion. But who knows how it all went down behind the scenes. You have a guy like Nico Williams, was never going to come to Bayern. Never, ever, ever was going to come to Bayern. He used Bayern to get a bigger contract at Athletic Bilbao. Um, Bradley Barcola was never going to leave PSG. PSG was never, ever going to let him leave. I don't think he would have even wanted to leave PSG. I mean, they have a great thing going. So it's like you spend a lot of time on guys like this. There's rumors they went in for Gittens after he was already heading to Chelsea. Rumors they went in for Antony when he was already heading to Betis. So it's like, I don't understand.
Simmons.
Yeah, Simmons. I don't understand why they like went for some of these guys knowing that they weren't going to get them or going in so late. It was like no idea what the point was there. So there was a lot of whiffs, a lot of time spent chasing the wrong players. That I blame on Ebro. I think that's mostly on Ebro there. But the guys that came in, let's just start with that actually, because there was so few that came in and there's so many to list that went out. Tom Bischoff coming in. I like Bischoff. You get him on a free, has a lot of potential. Unfortunate with the appendectomy, he's out right now, but again, I'm a little nervous. Bayern doesn't have a vision for the guy because he's young. He needs playing time. I don't want to see him punt a season and then get loaned out and then turn into a Paul Vonner or something. Jonathan Tah, I see why they brought Ta in. I think there is a vision there, but I just don't know if I agree with it. I just don't know if Ta's the player, even that he used to be, and I don't know if he ever was the guy that Bayern needs back there. I think he's a good communicator, a good leader, a good organizer, but he just has looked so slow lately. Saw it again today with the German national team. The goals were mostly on Rudiger, but Ta just looks so slow, and I'm worried that he's going to be able to keep up with some of these speedy attackers on Chelsea, on PSG, on these best teams in the world. Diaz, I think that's a good signing. Again, you need a left winger. You were on your hands and your knees begging for a left winger. So Diaz comes in. That's a good signing. Not my top left winger in the world. I made a tier ranking about that. So go ahead and watch that if you want to see all my preferences over Diaz, but happy he came in. And Jackson, again, not a guy who is my favorite player in the entire world, but I'm happy that he's here. Similar to Diaz, I think he can do great things with Bayern, but you know, just a little bit lackluster, especially when you thought you were going to get Florian Wirtz.
It's interesting because those four guys you just named, I would say three of them are great players on a world level. We got guys that are playing starting for their country. Diaz, Colombia, Ta, Germany, Jackson, Senegal, and Bischoff, who has great potential. So we're talking at some point could be four great players. The thing with Bayern, and I always talk about this, is an elite team. You're expecting to win the league every single year. So what you need to do with bringing in players and changing your team is go from elite winning the league to super team winning the Champions League. Do these moves do that? Remain to be seen. You know, these guys potentially could grow into the team that they're on and do amazing things in the Champions League. But that's the difference we're talking about at Bayern. And that level is just tough to get to. So we'll see. And it's tough to bring in players to get you there too, I might add, especially when you miss out on a guy like Wirtz.
Completely agree. Yeah, and I'll acknowledge that too. Like it's not an easy task to do, especially when you're only allowed to bring in guys on loan at the end there. So not an easy task to do, but you know, we see all these guys going out and yeah, I'll just start to name some of them. You got Tell going to Tottenham, obviously. Zane going to Gala in Turkey. Coman going to Saudi. Muller, who I'm going to come back to, going to Vancouver. And then you have Paul Vonner leaving, Adam Asnew leaving, Franz Kratzig leaving, and Gabriel Vidovic leaving. And I'm not even including a lot of these academy guys as well. Out on loan, you have João Palhinha, Kusi Asari, Ibrahimovic, Zvonarek, Peretz, Zaragoza, Buckman. So it's like you have all these guys going out.
Z-Man?
Z-Man, don't forget. And some of these moves needed to happen. Don't get me wrong. Some of these guys were hopefully going to develop, and some of these guys were never going to be Bayern Munich level quality. So a lot of these moves needed to happen. You make 10 million net, which is actually pretty impressive, and not even to mention salary, you save a hell of a lot of money in salary with these moves. So that was one of Max Eberl's tasks was to save money and also improve the squad. Did you save money? For sure. Did you improve the squad? Yet to be seen. Again, when everyone's healthy, I like this squad a lot. But is everyone going to be healthy? I don't know. So the final thing I want to mention here is Thomas Muller. The way that Bayern handled the Thomas Muller departure was horrible. To just kick him out when you're so sure that you're going to get Wirtz, and then Musiala gets injured, and you have no 10 right now. You have no natural 10 right now. Keeping Muller would have saved so many of our issues. You know, he could have helped develop some of these guys. He isn't a guy who is going to need playing time, but he's going to be there. He's going to be good to great. He's going to be magical sometimes. And again, like just keeping him around for one more year would have saved so many of our woes this transfer window, in my opinion. And I think the way that Bayern handled that situation was bad.
Yeah, it's tough. It's very tough. I see a lot of sides. I think Muller is a legend, rightfully so. Has he lost a step? Probably. Is he still special? Yes, definitely. Can he provide leadership, veteran squad building? Yes, of course. Is he basically a coach out there on the pitch? Yes, we know all these things about him. And at the same time, it's never easy to know when to transition from some of these club legends. And Bayern might have just missed when the right time was. I think we can probably all agree it maybe was a bit too early. But can you blame them for maybe thinking it was the right time? I don't know. Like I said, there's never a right time.
Yeah, fair. You know, again, I'll die on this hill, but like, just come to the table with an offer, I think. Even if it's a horrible, low pity offer. Come to the table with an offer. Let him leave on his own terms if he doesn't like it. But yeah, I'm gonna give this window a 4 out of 10 for Bayern, and I had it as a 5 out of 10, but I docked it a point just for the guys that they missed out on. So that's my final grade for Bayern. Might sound a little harsh, but I think it's like the squad is not a whole lot worse. Could be better if everybody's healthy. I just don't know if I see it. And missing out on Verts is like a generational fumble. So that's the main reason why I maybe graded it pretty low.
I think I got to go at least 6. Based on, some of your logic, did the squad get better? I think yes. The Verts thing, is it a miss? Yes. And
Well,
maybe that's your
I will say right now, if you want to count injuries in this, the squad is not better without Davies and Musiala.
and again, I'm not counting injuries.
Yeah, it's tough too.
Not considering injuries at all for Bayern. Did the squad get better? In my view, yes, they did. That's why I ultimately give them at least a 6 out of 10 overall. Ultimately, I think they could have done better and really shot for the moon, missing out on some guys. Maybe could have brought in some better pieces there, but I still think they're going to win the league and think these guys have a lot of potential. So we'll see what happens, but the potential is there for an exciting squad.
I will maintain that if this squad is healthy come crunch time, they can do it. We'll see. We'll see what happens. It's gonna be. There's no guarantees that you're gonna get a Musiala who's the Musiala we know, a Davies who's the Davies we know. These two guys suffered massive injuries, like not just a knock, not just I don't know, like a twisted ankle, an ankle that almost fell off, a torn ACL plus three other ligaments. Like, for a guy like Davies who relies on his speed to obviously these guys have the best medicine, they're superhuman athletes, yada yada yada, but there just is no guarantee with injuries that are that brutal.
Does Musiala have access to Russian super ibuprofens?
We'll see. We'll see if he joins Mudryk on the list.
Oh, that'd be brutal. But I agree with the sentiment there on those injuries. Yeah, we'll see. With this Club World Cup, a lot of injuries already. I'm just worried that a lot of these teams are going to have a lot of injuries.
Yeah, I think that they will, unfortunately, but we will see. That's the joy of this game. I can't wait until matches come back next weekend. As fun as drama filled and exciting as the transfer window is, I'm glad it's over. I'm in it for watching the matches. That's the best part about being a fan, not following the jet plans of Nico Jackson and where his agents are tweeting from today. So I can't wait for the matches to come back. But we just thought we'd wrap up the transfer window, try to put a bow on things, try to make sense of things, and kind of give you a overview in one episode, packaged neatly right here.
Only part I'll add to that is that it is insane how dead Twitter is this week compared to the last few. It just is a barren, barren wasteland.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, right now, the most excitement on my Twitter is unfortunately Julian Nagelsmann throwing shots at Bayern Munich and at his players after Germany's disgusting defeat today in the World Cup qualifiers. So stay tuned for more. Please subscribe to our Always Bayern Chelsea channel here. Leave us a like, leave us a comment. We will be doing everything we possibly can to keep you covered, including, yes, live streaming the Bayern Munich Chelsea match in the Champions League. That's all I gotta say. I'm gonna send us off now with a Mia San Mia.
Up the Chelsea.